Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology. Well, welcome people. My name is Dr. George Sparks. I have my special guest, Dr. David Graves. And we got a really cool topic today. It appears today he's at the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, you know, where King Tut was at. Let me read his background just in case anybody doesn't know. Dr. Graves received his PhD at Aberdeen University in Scotland. He is a native of Canada, has been involved in teaching Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years, a retired assistant professor at Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity at Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at Oxford University, England, provided tours at the Ashmolean as well as the British Museum, traveled extensively in the Middle East, been involved in the Mount Ararat research, and consultant for the National Geographic Productions. He has been involved in archaeology excavations at Qumran, the Temple Mount, and also Shiloh. Also extending over to Jordan, the Tel El Hammam excavation project. In January 2017, he was a part of a team who excavated the Dead Sea Scroll Cave 53 near Qumran in Israel and discovered evidence that the cave once contained some Dead Sea Scrolls. The cave is now identified as Q12. For many years, Dr. David Graves has also been a field supervisor at Tel El Hammam. I tell everybody he was once my square supervisor, but back then without the beard. Also, he is a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society. He has authored a number of books, which we always would like to advertise, published to his company, Electronic Christian Media. In addition, he is an author of a number of journals and articles on the Bible and archaeology, most available through the academia.ed. Now, I go to that all the time, academia.ed. So, people, if you're interested, which you should be, go ahead and pick up his books. I got a few here. Maybe I can show you one. I always keep them as reference materials. This is one, Old Testament archaeology. Here's a big, thick one right here. We talked about this one. Hopefully, we'll have these podcasts up soon. Jesus Speaks to the Seven Churches. All these books, tons of great information. I use them as resource material myself because it makes me look more professional and like I've studied this. So I do take advantage of it. Sometimes I don't give you credit for it, David. I'm sorry. I just act like I'm smart, you know. That's all.
That's fine. As long as people get educated, that's what matters.
You know, I appreciate it. Well, I'm glad you're healthy. You know, I'll just give the people a heads up. We have a little time variant, and so we're getting started a little later. And I was kind of worried about Dr. Graves, if he was okay or not. So I'm glad to see him. Even if he's not in Portugal, he's at the Valley of the Kings. So now I understand the time delay.
Yeah, good to be with you, George.
Thank you.
Our topic for today is the Egyptian execration texts. Basically, they're curse tablets, and they're kind of interesting and kind of fun. Even though we're talking about curses, most of them are located in Egypt, and almost every site that they dig at in Egypt have discovered them. 750 at Mergiasa, Elephantine. There's a lot of tablets found there. Abydos, the Saqqara tablets. Those are actually on display in the Brussels Museum. There's tons of these things that they dig up as archaeologists work along these ancient sites. They're sometimes called proscription lists as well as execration texts, but they're generally more commonly called execration texts. They date from 1878 BC to about 1630 BC, so they're quite old. About 400 at Giza, the famous Giza pyramid, when they were excavating there. They're found in two museums. The Egyptian Museum in Berlin is where a lot of them are on display and housed, and the Royal Museum of Art and History in Brussels. And there's probably some in the British Museum. I'm not positive on that, but I'm sure they must have some of these because they're so prevalent everywhere. But this is where these are the two museums where the bulk of them are displayed and stored. There's a photograph on the right of a couple of them. They were put onto figurines, and so there's two different groups or types, and there's about 1,000 Egyptian hieratic clay bowls. These are some fragments there on the terracotta color, and then the figurines on the right. So they have them. They're a little bit like a voodoo doll, is what you might compare them to in modern culture. So they write a curse on them, and then they use them in a lot of different kinds of ceremonies. Sometimes they use these bowls. They'll shatter them as an indication of what might happen to their enemies. Hieratic is actually a shorthand kind of Egyptian, is what hieratic is. So you find them in a number of different kinds of script. They go back to the Old Kingdom, in the New Kingdom. There are the dates in Egypt. The earliest physical execration texts date to around the 6th dynasty during Egyptians' Old Kingdom. They're statues made from unbaked clay, fashioned into the shape of the bound foreigners. So they would have sort of like handcuffs on or have their hands tied behind or in front, with the names inscribed on their chest, often in red ink, as we see here on the photograph. And then they are broken in a ritual so that archaeologists must put them together to determine what they say. So they basically give them a big jigsaw puzzle, and they have to put the pieces together. We do that a lot with pottery. And they have descriptions on them about eradicating their enemies, and sometimes human sacrifice is connected and associated with these things. They're smashed or stomped on or stabbed or cut or speared or spat on or locked in a box, burned or saturated with urine. They pee on them and finally they bury them. So, these are the execration texts. They're basically a curse tablet, and they're cursing their enemies, wishing all the bad things to happen to their enemies. And they do these bad things to these execration texts as a representative of what they're going to do to their enemies. So, like I said, they're kind of like the voodoo doll thing where you stick the pins in them. But not every execration included all of the previous components, so they didn't do all of those things every time. But they had their own recipe, what they might put together and perform a ritual or ceremony. And so the full rite could use any of these actions numerous times with numerous figures. So there wasn't any set recipe for it. One recorded rite gives the instructions: spit on him 4 times, trample on him with a left foot, smite him with a spear, slaughter him with a knife, place him on the fire, spit on him in the fire many times. So, anything you can think of about doing something terrible or bad to this individual or country or nation or city, they write on these tablets. Curses were written on these potsherds and figurines and then broken, as I said, and then buried near the tombs and the ritual sites. That's where you find a lot of them in the Valley of the Kings, which is the photograph as I displayed behind me. That's a photograph of the tomb of King Tut that I took when I was in Egypt a few years ago. And so they find a lot of these execration texts near these pyramids. And they're a common practice during the time of the patriarchs, the biblical patriarchs. And some scholars have suggested that the Egyptian execration texts have inspired the biblical prophets to place curses on their enemies. But some, such as Kenton Sparks, disagree. The primary problem, he says, with this suggestion is that the biblical books contain prophecies against foreign nations rather than simple lists and there's no evidence that these prophecies were ever attached to ritual ceremonies, the ones that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, some may debate that, and there could be a lot of, as I do, but that's his perspective on there's no connection between the execration text and the curses found in the prophets. But the contents, they also mention some of the earliest references to biblical people. And this is what their value is for biblical studies. So these people are Job, Zebulon, which is one of the tribes, and also an individual. Joseph and Jacob are mentioned on them. In biblical cities, Jerusalem, Dan, Ashkelon, Shechem, Hatzor, and Biblos, and Rehoboth. So, and others, there's many others. So there are many, many names of these biblical cities that are mentioned on these texts as well. So it helps authenticate the spelling and the names of biblical people as well as the cities. One contains what is possibly the first known mention of Jerusalem from the beginning of the second millennium BC, the end of the 11th or 12th dynasty in Egypt. So a very, very early reference to Jerusalem found on them. Here are some of the sources. Leatham, Broadman's, his edition of Cambridge Ancient History. John Wilson has it's actually mentioned the Ancient Near Eastern Texts by Pritchard, which is a standard work for translations in English. The Execration of Asiatic Princes. Here's one from the Roman period, a Roman curse tablet. This was found in Bath, UK. There's 130 of them found, these curse tablets. May he who carries off Vilbia from me become liquid as the water. May she who so obscenely devours her become dumb. There's a lot of these curse tablets around. So that's a little bit of an introduction to execration tablets. And perhaps, George, you may have a few questions.
Yeah, actually, do we have any equivalencies of that in the biblical narrative?
Yes, we do.
Because I was trying to think of a case in my head where I was thinking, like, where do we have somebody writing a curse?
Oh, many of the Psalms that David wrote are actually called curse psalms. The term just avoids me right now in my mind. I'm getting old for this. I forget the name of it, but there's a special term used. They're imprecations, the impurgatory psalms. I wrote a whole paper on it once. I just can't think of the name. David curses his enemies, curses those that are against him. Some have suggested they shouldn't be psalms, but he uses some fairly harsh language against his enemies in those psalms.
Other nations had their curse rituals, and Israel was typically no different. They had their spites as well to invoke, could I say Yahweh, Adonai, yes, against their enemies as well.
Yeah, it was a common practice. It was well understood. And as we see, they're very common in Egypt, but they also filter into Israel, Syria, and the whole region, and up in Mesopotamia as well. So cursing your enemies was a common practice. And like we have, as I said, with the voodoo dolls in North America from a much later period, but we get the idea of how they kind of worked or supposed to work.
Now, do we have any artifacts? Let's reverse that. We have Egyptian artifact cursing cities in, I'll just say, Canaan. But do we have anything of Israel cursing the other countries that they're going to war with, like the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Egyptians, the Midians?
Not artifacts that I'm aware of, but the prophets actually had statements in the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, that mention cursing their enemies. Of course, they have the Ebla tablet, but that's not, that's just a standard curse. I'm not an expert on the curse tablets. There's probably some out there. if someone wanted to do a bit of research on that. I'm sure there's a paper describing it. What biblical scholars generally try and do is they try and put distance between the execration text in Egypt and the biblical curses that we have in Scripture.
But okay, we got tablets that curse, but we also have amulets that protect. I think in the New Testament, one that I remember, it lists all the different sins of the flesh. Even that nasty word lasciviousness is in there. You know, you do a lot of things, but when it comes to lasciviousness, I'm not sure about that. But it lists this one that I thought was very interesting. It was called the evil eye.
Yeah.
But they actually have, and we found them. I had some in the museum. I don't have any here to show anybody. But what they're called, they're circular discs. It could be different shapes. I know the Israel Museum has them on display. They're called evil eye reflectors. And they just got, it could have a piece of metal in the center of them. And this was the idea that if somebody came in the vicinity or in your household, that these evil eye reflectors were placed throughout the house. Mm-hmm. So that if somebody comes in to give the evil eye, that it would be reflected back on them, their own, we could say, malevolent intent. And I know that there's been lots of those found, lots of the evil eye reflectors. Yes. And another one that comes from, I think maybe starts around the 4th century of the Common Era, AD or CE, is what we call the incantation bowls. And they would write a script inside protecting their household for different types of malevolent spirits. Let's just say evil spirits. And yes, they would use certain names of power and authorities. So I have seen them. Matter of fact, Dr. Rami Arab translated one for me. And it actually mentioned, I believe it was Joseph and Moses. Mm-hmm. So names of authority. And they'd be used in the incantation bowl within the, you could say the
on the inside, yeah,
yeah, so that it would be a name of authority. And I guess, you know, knowing the name was important. Using the name of your deity that you worshipped was important. It had power, it had influence, and it also could be invoked. Yeah. So there's more behind just the cursed objects that you showed. There's also the reverse of that, because people believed it so strong. They actually would have implements underneath the foundation of their house, actually in the rooms of their house, to help them defend themselves against this type of malevolent activity. What else? Would you think a mezuzah would protect a house? Was that there just as a reminder of scripture, reminder of a covenant, or is that a type of protection? Would you know?
That was traditionally, had a religious significance to it. But what we find is there's a lot of syncretism in the ancient Near East, where something that was religious, had religious value, sort of morphed over into a spiritual or kind of a good luck charm. So it held, for some people, it would have obviously held both elements or both ideas. So,
because another amulet that we actually find in a lot of tombs is that Egyptian scarab that they use as a ring.
Yeah,
is made out of different substance, and they can wear it as necklaces. Whereas the ring, on one side, it looks like a little scarab beetle, but on the other side, usually in hieroglyph, it's either the name of a very powerful pharaoh. Mm-hmm. And those seem to be kept in circulations for decades, if not centuries, maybe as jewelry, but also as a lucky charm, using, once again, a name of somebody with great authority. A pharaoh would have been possibly, I believe, to be a son of the divine. So that'd be a very, like a powerful amulet to have on you.
Everybody wants to have a rabbit's foot, for good luck.
and that's bringing it into today, where you think of a rabbit's foot. And if I was Jewish, I'd have possibly the Star of David. How many Christians have or wear crosses?
Yes.
And also post them in their house.
Yep.
Some for reminders of their spirituality and their faith. Others as a deterrent, let's say it, from malevolent spirits again. even today, we do the same thing, don't we?
Yeah. I think that the belief system of ancient spirits was much more prevalent in the ancient Near East than it is perhaps for us today. I think you did an interview with Irving Finkel from the
A couple
British
weeks ago.
Museum about
That's
ghosts
correct.
and how prevalent the idea of ghosts were in the ancient Near East. He's correct. I mean, it's in stone, it's in writing, it's on the tablets. Here we have this the prevalence of these cursed tablets being so prevalent in the tombs of the Egyptians and all the different sites is testimony, I think, to this belief system. They were much more spiritual and believed in spirits more than we do in our culture today. We've become much more naturalistic and humanistic in some senses.
Yeah, and that's very true because if somebody would say, you know what, I think I seen a specter, we kind of think about, well, is this person all right? Maybe you had a bad or stressful day. What's the other one that we could leave it off to is sleep paralysis. Maybe you're suffering from sleep paralysis. We
Yeah.
kind of we kind of sidestep it a lot, where in the ancient cultures it was just a big part of life, and that was it.
Yeah, it was very pervasive, and we see it. We even see it in some of the in the etchings of Pompeii. The Romans had, as I show, the Roman curse tablets. Depictions are very prevalent. As I said, 130 of them found in the Bath in Bath, UK, around the Bath complex, the Temple Courtyard area. This stuff was pretty prevalent, and the ancient people had a sense and a reality of the spiritual realm. They had to confront it every single day as they went about their business, whether they were going to the guilds, as we talked about with Laodicea, and the different guilds of dying and what have you. They all had their religious practice when they went to their union meeting for their dyers guild or whichever guild they would belong to, the metal workers guild. They would do sacrifices at the same time. So the spiritual realm was very prevalent and much more prevalent than it is today in our own culture. And I think we've moved away from that. And I'm not saying or arguing that it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that we have some sense of the spiritual realm.
You know, it's not really off subject, but since you mentioned Dr. Irving Finkel, I think he was in his early life as a child, maybe up to his early teens. He was Jewish, raised Jewish. When he became a teenager, probably up in his teens, he became an atheist. It's not uncommon.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at in a podcast. I'm looking at this gentleman, very brilliant, very very popular as an atheist. Okay,
Mhm.
but yet when he described his after he wrote his book and he's out traveling for publicity, doing speeches, and he's listening to people, like after hours when they go out to eat, tell their stories. You know what he
Mhm.
said? How does it? He says, you know what? He goes, I believe some people are born that have the ability to see spirits. This is what he said. I'm just doing a quote. Just as some people are born and they say they're colorblind, or some people can't hear. Some people are also born where they have this ability where they can see this. And I can't believe he said that. And I was going to ask him, I said, well, how does an atheist believe in an afterlife? Because you're telling me we didn't go into detail. We ran out of time. I said, but as an atheist, you're telling me that you believe in spirits. He goes, well, I do now. I go, that's pretty intense, isn't it? That's,
That's
I said,
pretty.
I couldn't figure. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah, his research has led him. It reminds me of William Ramsey, who didn't believe that the cities that Luke talked about existed until he went to the Asia Minor, to Turkey, modern day Turkey, and started rooting around in all the different archaeological sites and discovered that they were actually where Luke said they were.
Mm-hmm.
He followed the map, and it took him to his destination, and made a believer out of him because he saw the evidence. It was clear.
Right. Well, it is just fantastic, and I appreciate all the time that you're giving to Bible Interact uh, with your slides and your experience, and also the fun that we have with our little side conversations that everybody can listen in. And also, be sure to chime in, people. Go ahead. We'd like to hear from you as well. Just as
Yes,
a reminder, this is Bible Interact, and this is biblical archaeology from the ground down. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Don't go away, but I got so much time for this, so it can view on other programs as well. So everybody have a great day. I appreciate you subscribing. Matter of fact, let me say this: within the last year, with the assistance of Dr. Graves, the Bible Interact subscriptions have more than doubled, and it's because of you people. Keep it up because I rely on the subscriptions um, for bringing scholars in that have written books because I said we got almost like 17,000 and we're still climbing, and we got an avenue for you to influence the people and also to buy the books that I think can influence us and also help us in our everyday walk of faith as well as educational. So with that being said, Doctor, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
always great to be with you, George. Thanks.